Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Hi, welcome to ILANOMICS. The United States of America, the largest economy in the world, has slipped into recession. The World Bank has announced that 90% of countries in the world will also be in recession in 2020. And this obviously includes India. We have already been seeing the uh, signs of recession, and our economy was also slowing down even before the COVID pandemic hit us and there was a lockdown. How bad is this recession going to be? What is the impact of the US recession on India? Will there be an impact in the first place? And what will be the recovery like and the shape of the recovery? I have Ila Patnaik with me. We are back on SimSat, that is talking digitally uh, through the internet. Hi, Ila. Uh,
Right.
the news from the United States was not good. I mean, the world's largest economy is slipping into a recession, but it was not unexpected either. Uh, you're talking about why, first of all, the US has made this kind of an announcement so early on. Can you explain that to our viewers?
So, the US National Bureau of Economic Research is the institution that actually dates business cycles in the US. It has a business cycle dating committee, and this business cycle dating committee looks at a number of economic variables, tracks economic data, and then based on whether it's widespread, how many variables they are, how long it's been in slowdown or contraction, they call they announce that the economy is in recession. Usually, the rule of thumb has been that at least 2 quarters of slowdown or contraction of GDP. 2 quarters of GDP contraction earlier were what used to be called a recession typically. I mean, there's a judgment as well as data analysis when the NBR does dating cycles and announcements of recession. So using both judgment and data, this time interestingly, it is different from the old earlier rule of thumb. This time, even though it's not been 2 quarters since February yet, but they've announced a recession because of the depth of the recession. The sharp decline that we are witnessing, the sharp decline that the US is witnessing for a large number of variables. So, you look at things like employment, output, sales, and these constitute the state of the economy. And they have said that clearly now this economy is in a recession. I would just say that since 2009, there was a long expansion, perhaps one of the longest expansions that the US economy witnessed. And February now marks the end of that very long recession. I'm sorry, very long expansion
Expansion.
and the beginning of a recession. So
Recession.
that's the NBER announcement.
And to just to remind our viewers that expansion started after the global financial crisis.
Yeah, expansion started after. So the recession before this was in 2008, and that ended in 2009 with the expansionary policies, the various policies that the government of the US adopted and the Fed adopted for getting out of the recession. And since then, it had been a long period of expansion.
Uh, Ila, this time you say in your column that the recession is different, or the characteristic of this recession is different. Are you, first of all, you need to explain why it is different. And are you referring to only the recession in the US, or are you saying the overall global recession itself is different?
See, the overall global recession is different. So first, I said why the US is different. That it's a very sharp decline in a lot of variables, rather than a little longer period of several months or 2 quarters or so of decline. So it is the very sharp downward trend, and that's one reason why it's different. I think the other reason why it's different is the high level of synchronization of cycles across the globe. So there's a World Bank economic outlook report that was published just this week, and that talked about how 90% of the world's economies are going to be in recession this year. And not just advanced economies, but even emerging economies will see a contraction. This is going to be the worst recession, and there'll be a decline in per capita GDP. The worst recession since 46 after the World War. And there will be a contraction, and this will hit everyone. And interestingly, it will hit everyone at the same time. Normally, you see lags, so one economy goes in recession, and then after that, other economies see the impact and they also get hit. But this time, and it's very different in a third very, very important way, not just for the US, but for everybody else. And that is the reason why we are seeing this recession. Earlier recessions were either because of an oil price shock, say the Latin American debt crisis, the Asian crisis because of their currency situation, fiscal policies, or factors which were structural. So things that were to do with the economy. This time, the recession is a response to the COVID crisis. It's something that the governments basically announced. They switched off that you can't produce, you can't
Supply.
supply, you can't demand, because you can't go out to market. So that, in that sense, this is the first recession that we are witnessing that is a man-made, or rather a recession caused by a pandemic. We've never had a recession caused by a pandemic. So it's very different in its nature.
Would it be correct to say or compare this to, the economy being sent into an induced coma?
In some ways, when you have decided that things will be shut down, you can also decide when things will be switched on. Except that, I guess, like an induced coma, the body takes time to come back, and the economy takes time to come back. In this case, a lot of pain has been witnessed. Businesses have accumulated debt. Many businesses have died. Many have seen a complete loss of income while they have been paying out salaries. Others have not even been able to pay out salaries. Many businesses have faced a lot of uncertainty, airlines, hotels, restaurants, uh, media, or performing arts. There are many, many services and businesses which have faced extreme and are still facing extreme uncertainty. So, it's not like a switch on, switch off. You're right. It's more like an induced coma, because you can't just pull it back and switch it back on.
Also, an important point you make, Ela, is for emerging economies. It's, generally emerging economies would slow down if there was a recession or if there was a global recession, but this time they will actually contract. Why is that so worrying? And when we say contract, even the Indian economy has been forecast to contract in 2020-21.
Absolutely. So when we study emerging economy business cycles, then we find that they witness growth cycles or growth rate cycles, and they don't actually witness declines in output or contraction. Whereas advanced economies grow 3-4%. If 4 is a very high rate for them. So when they have business cycles and they go into a recession, then GDP actually contracts. Whereas for emerging economies, the growth rate slows down. Okay? So it's not the growth goes down, it's not GDP that goes down, but the growth rate of GDP that goes down. Now, this time, because of the lockdown, we've had these 2-3 months of no output. So it wasn't about growth rate. It wasn't how much did you produce over and above what you produced last year. No. This year you didn't for these 2-3 months, this quarter, you didn't produce, many sectors didn't produce anything, and many produced less than what they normally produced. So it wasn't that you are producing, you would have produced more than last year, and this time it is slower than what would otherwise have been. So it's a very, very different kind of recession. I would say it's more like, the monsoon shocks that we used to have. It's a huge shock.
Mhm.
It's a temporary shock. I think what's important is to understand that it's not a permanent shock.
Mhm.
Hopefully, unless COVID doesn't go away. But I think we are seeing signs that
Mhm.
economies have started,
Mhm. Mhm.
or countries have started seeing less cases now.
Mhm.
So if in that case, we could maybe not need as much time for recovery as we would have in previous cycles. So imagine, when oil price goes up permanently, it's a permanent shock. The entire economy has to now use less fuel. It has to produce cars, design cars which are fuel efficient, design factories, mechanisms,
Mhm.
systems which are more fuel efficient. Whereas if you said you're where you were, you stopped, and then you have to go back, that's a transitory or a temporary shock. So hopefully
Or
that also means one can recover faster.
or successive droughts.
Or successive droughts. Same. So monsoon shocks, successive droughts, or if you have an increase in oil price but it goes back down, then that's like a temporary shock. And when it's a temporary shock, then economies have a better ability to adjust, because in some ways, structurally, they're going back to where they were. They're not having to cope with something that is very new. So we need to, have get our policies right. Of course, we need to provide liquidity, push demand, and so on, even after the health crisis is over. But it could be that we can adjust quickly.
The point you make about decoupling, Ila, a lot of people think, array, there is a slowdown or a recession in the US. How does it affect us? Our economy is different. We are a, economy dependent on domestic demand. China is an economy dependent on exports. But that is not true, isn't it? I mean, you talk about a paper you wrote in 2009 about decoupling or
Yes.
rejecting the decoupling hypothesis.
So there, after the global crisis, there was a lot of talk that we are not affected, India is not affected, and people would say we have decoupled. So there was a hypothesis that our economies are now decoupled from advanced economies. So in this paper, my colleague and I studied business cycles in India and in the US and the world, and we find interestingly that because of the trade links, finance links, increasingly, actually, we studied the period from 1992 to 2008, and we find that with the increased integration with the world, our business cycles have become more coupled. So you take out the cyclical component, you look at the movements of the cyclical component, co-movements, and you find that those are actually higher. So I would imagine that even in the last 10 years, after the paper was written in 2009, so after that 10 to 12 years, even you would have increased the coupling or the co-movements of business cycles, because we're actually seeing greater integration with world economies.
Last question, and I think probably that's the most significant part of our conversation today, Ila, is you say it is not all gloomy for India. We may actually be able to bounce back probably faster, and you're also talking about CMIE data on employment. Give us the good news.
So the good news, which was actually published in a report in ThePrint by authored by Ramya Nair, is that CMI has these weekly employment surveys. So they survey households and they ask them, are you looking for a job? Have you got a job? So are you employed, unemployed, and labor force participation, whether you're looking for a job. When we compare the numbers from just before the lockdown, so 22nd March, and then April numbers, say 22nd or so April, and then the numbers in May, then we find that after March there was a very sharp decline in employment, but much before we expected, the employment numbers have started going up. And that's where, I started thinking that perhaps we have some good news in store for us, and that good news is that we may recover faster than we think, faster than we expect. Many economists were surprised that it recovered, employment has started recovering. I think last time we talked about how migrants are coming back to cities. We've also, throughout the week, we've been reading stories about how employers are trying to get their workers back, paying for them to travel so that they can start running their enterprises again. So wherever it's allowed, wherever it's safe, in those areas, business may bounce back. And that would be good, not just here, but maybe hopefully this recession will be shorter than other recessions, even though it is deeper and far more lethal than other recessions, but hopefully it will be shorter.
This recession is deeper and probably far more lethal than the ones India has seen in the past. But this is also likely to be a shorter recession. That's fantastic positive news we can take away from this episode of ILANOMICS. Thanks for watching this episode. And I also want to thank all our readers and viewers who have paid subscriptions to The Print. If you have not and you would like to support good journalism, I would appeal to you to support The Print by taking up our subscriptions. Thanks for watching this one, and we will be back with another episode next week. Please do keep watching and reading us.
Thank you.